Happy day students, welcome to SAN Academy, Pallikaranai, grade 9. Today we are going to discuss about the first chapter in unit 1, India and the Contemporary World, which is the French Revolution. By looking at the French Revolution, you will read a small part of the history and how the French Revolution led to the end of monarchy in France. The society based on privileges gave to a new system of governance, so truly said by Duke Metternich that if France sneezes, the rest of the Europe catches cold. In this, you're going to read about the three estates. You will also become aware of the reasons why people in France were struggling to survive, what is meant by subsistence crisis, and the reasons for the emergence of a new social group called the middle class. You will also see how this struggle for survival and subsistence crisis led to the outbreak of revolution, which ended the monarchy and the formation of a constitutional monarchy under the General Assembly. Later, you will see that this constitutional monarchy will be replaced by a republic with the emergence of various clubs, out of which Jacobin Club becomes the most well known. We will also see the role of women in French Revolution. The most important concept you are going to read in this French Revolution is the triangular slave trade and the abolition of the slave trade in France and its colonies. And we should always keep in mind that any event that takes place in the society will always have an effect on the everyday life. So the impact of revolution in everyday life will also be covered in this chapter. The chapter starts with the storming of Bastille. Now, why Bastille was stormed and what is this Bastille is what we are going to start the chapter with. On the morning of 14th July 1789, the city of Paris was in great turmoil because the people of France have heard that the king was going to send his troops into Paris who will open fire on the people. Having heard that, the people were in great tension and they wanted to form people's militia to attack the troops in return. In order to find these weapons, they wanted to storm Bastille, which is actually a prison, because they had the opinion that this prison would be hoarded with ammunition. During the storming of Bastille, a lot of damage took place, including the death of commander of Bastille. Hardly any weapons were present, but still the Bastille was attacked. Now the question comes, why only Bastille? Because Bastille stood for the despotic power of the king, and that was the reason for the hatred of the people towards this structure. The fortress was demolished and some fragments that were left behind were sold in the market as souvenirs. Much later, when historians looked back upon this time, they saw it as the beginning of a chain of events that ultimately led to execution of king in France, though most people at that time did not anticipate this outcome. How and did this happen is what we are going to look in this chapter. In 1774, Louis XVI of Bourbon family of kings ascended the throne of France. He was 20 years old and married to Austrian Princess Marie Antoinette. Upon his accession, the new king found an empty treasury. The reasons for this empty treasury are: long years of war had drained the financial resources of France. Added to this was the cost of maintaining an extravagant court at the immense palace of Versailles. Under Louis XVI, France had 13 American colonies to gain their independence from the common enemy Britain. These were the reasons for an empty treasury. With an empty treasury, it was very difficult for the king to administer. Therefore, there was a need to increase taxes. Now, to increase taxes, we need to understand how the French society was in the 18th century old regime. In this slide, you are going to look at a flow chart consisting of three estates: the first estate, second estate, and the third estate. The first estate consisted of the clergy, the second estate consisted of nobility, and in the third estate, you are going to see further subdivision. The first being the big businessmen, merchants, court officials, lawyers, followed by peasants and artisans, and in the last you see small peasants, landless labor and servants. Now here we are going to see the taxes were paid by the which estate. The members of the first two estate, that is the clergy and the nobility, enjoyed certain privileges by birth. The most important of these was exemption from paying taxes to the state. The nobles further enjoyed feudal privileges. These included feudal dues which they extracted from the peasants. So now it is clear that the clergy, which is a first estate, and the nobility, which is a second estate, did not have to pay the taxes. The burden of paying the taxes was, however, on the third estate. Now, having said the taxes, let us see how many types of taxes were present. Basically, the taxes were of three types: tithes, tales, and indirect taxes. So now let us see. The church extracted its share of tax called the tithes. So that means tithes is the tax taken by the church from the present, and all the members of the third estate had to pay taxes to the state. That means tale was taken by the state, tithe by the church, and tale by the state. In addition to this tithe and tale, the people of third estate also had to pay indirect taxes for certain commodities like salt and tobacco, which were of everyday consumption during that time in France. The entire burden of paying all the three types of taxes, however, was on the third estate. As I have told before, the taxes were paid by the members of the third estate and not by the members of the first and the second estate. Now let us look into understand what is meant by subsistence crisis. The population of France rose from 23 million to 28 million in 1789. This led to a rapid increase in the demand for food grains. However, the production of food grains did not keep pace with the demand. So therefore, what happens as a result? The price of bread has gone up, and most workers were employed as laborers in workshops, and the wages that were paid to these laborers was very less. So the food grains production did not increase, the population increased, and the wages did not increase. Therefore, the gap between the rich and the poor increased. This led to a situation which we call as the subsistence crisis. With the situation becoming worse, there emerges a new social group called as the middle class. Now let us see who these middle class members were. The middle class earned their wealth through an expanding overseas trade and from the manufacturing of goods such as woolen and silk textiles that were either exported or bought by either the rich members of the society. In addition to the merchants and the manufacturers, the third estate included professionals such as lawyers or administrative officials. Now, these were the people, the middle class in Europe, were the people who believed that the special privileges given to the first and second estate should be done away with. However, the importance given to a person should be based on the merit and not on birth. Such ideas were also spread by great philosophers of those time, as shown in the slide, like John Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau, who spread their idea in the society through print media. You will see that in two treatises of government, Locke sought to refute the doctrine of divine and absolute right of the monarchy. Rousseau carried the idea forward, proposing a form of government based on a social contract between people and their representatives. In the spirit of laws, Montesquieu proposed a division of power within the government between the legislative, executive, and the judiciary. Now the time has come for voting to increase the taxes. So on May 5th, 1789, Louis XVI calls together an assembly of estate generals to pass proposals for the new taxes. We need to understand that though king had the ultimate power, in order to increase the taxes, the protocol that was followed in old regime is to have a meeting with the estate generals. Now, the first estate sends 300 members, the second estate sends 300 members and the third estate sends 600 members. In this picture, you will see how the voting took place for the increase of taxes. The first and the second estate with the 300 representatives each were seated in rows facing each other. Here you see each other on two sides, while the 600 members of the third estate had to stand way back here. So in the front you see the first and the second estate facing each other, and in the back you will see the third estate 600 members who were actually standing. The voting method was each estate used to get one vote. First estate one vote collective, second estate one vote collective, and the third estate also one vote collective. However, now the middle class, which were prosperous and educated, did not like this idea. They wanted a change in the method of voting. They said that instead of each house having one vote, why not each member having one vote? However, this idea was not welcomed by the king. Once the king has rejected this idea, the third estate, being not happy with the king's decision, walked out of the assembly and gathered in the tennis court. Now, this is an important event. In the tennis court, the middle class have decided that they have to declare themselves as National Assembly, and they swore not to disperse till they have declared a constitution for France that would limit the powers of the monarch. So now comes into the picture, France becomes a constitutional monarchy. Here you see a flowchart that gives a brief view how the constitutional monarchy was present. That means king was there. However, he was guided by a set of rules framed by the National Assembly, which was called as a constitution. The Constitution of 1791 vested the powers to make laws in the National Assembly, which was indirectly elected. That is, citizens voted for a group of people. That means here the citizens voted for a group of people. However, all the citizens did not have the right to vote. Only men about 25 years of age who paid taxes equal to 3 days of labor wages were given the status of active citizens, and the remaining were called as passive citizens. So active citizens could vote. They would elect a group of people who will further elect the members of National Assembly, who had a control over the king and the ministers. There was a separate unit, the judiciary, which would look into the law. This was the structure of France under constitutional monarchy. This constitutional monarchy has framed a constitution which starts with declaration of rights of man and citizens. Rights such as right to life, freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, equality before law were established as natural and inalienable rights. That is, they belong to each and every human being by birth and could not be taken away. It was a duty of the state to protect each citizen's natural rights. However, all the people in French society during that time could not read. Therefore, the information and the important ideas were transferred in the form of symbols, which are shown in this slide. For example, the broken chains here were used to fetter slaves. A broken chain stands for the act of becoming free. The eye within a triangle radiating light. The all-sensing eye stands for knowledge. The rays of sun will drive away the clouds of ignorance. Snake biting its tail to form a ring, symbol of eternity. The ring has neither beginning nor end. Then we have the bundle of rods. One rod can be easily broken, but not an entire bundle. Strength lies in unity. The red Phrygian cap worn by slaves upon becoming free. The blue, white and red, the national colors of France. The winged woman, personification of law. The law tablet, the law is same for all and all are equal before law. The situation in France continued to be tense during the following years. Although Louis XVI has signed the constitution, he entered into a secret pact with Russia, and the rulers of neighboring countries were worried what was happening in France because they thought that the same might happen in their kingdoms also. So, having known that the king had made this secret pact with Prussia, in April 1792, the National Assembly voted for a war against Prussia and Austria. Now, many people took part in this war. Many songs were sung in this war. Among the patriotic songs they sang was the Marseillaise. It was composed by the poet Robert de Isle. It was sung for the first time by volunteers from Marseilles as they marched into France, Paris, and so got its name. The Marseillaise is now the national anthem of France. Now we will move on to political clubs. Political clubs became an important rallying point for people who wished to discuss government policies and plan their own form of action. The most successful of these clubs was that of Jacobins, which got its name from the former convent of Saint Jacob in Paris under the leadership of Maximilien Robespierre. Members of Jacobin Club included small shopkeepers, artisans such as shoemakers, pastry cooks, watchmakers, and printers. Now we are going to see the shift of constitutional monarchy into a republic. Summer 1792, the Jacobins planned an insurrection of a large number by the farmers who were enraged by the short supply and high prices of food. On the morning of August 10th, they stormed the palace of Tuileries, massacred the king, guards, and held the king himself as hostage for several hours. Later, the assembly voted to imprison the royal family. Elections were held. From now on, all men of 21 years and above, regardless of wealth, got the right to vote. Louis XVI, however, was taken to trial and later guillotined. Though the principle of this Jacobin club was initially welcome, later you will see that Robespierre followed a policy of severe control and punishment. Whoever Robespierre saw as enemies of republic were arrested, imprisoned, and then tried by a revolutionary tribunal. If they were declared guilty by the court, they were guillotined. Meat and bread were rationed. Expensive white flour was forbidden to use. Instead, people were forced to eat equality bread. Equality was practiced through forms of speech and address as well. In French, there was a tradition of addressing men and women as Madame and Monsieur. However, during the reign of terror, men and women had to be addressed as citoyen and citoyenne, that is a citizen, and not as Madame and Monsieur. However, Robespierre pursued his policies so relentlessly that even his supporters began to demand moderation. In July 1794, he was convicted by a court, arrested, and next day sent to guillotine. So with the death of Robespierre, the directory falls. Now we are going to see the role of women in French Revolution. From the very beginning, women were active participants in the events which brought so many important changes in French society. They hoped that their involvement would pursue the revolutionary government to introduce measures to improve their lives. Most women of the Third Estate had to work for a living. However, many women were very disappointed when the Declaration of Rights of Man did not grant equal citizenship to women. Women did gain some rights later on. However, they did not last for very long after Napoleon gained power. Now we are going to come to a very important concept called the triangular slave trade. One of the most revolutionary social reforms of the Jacobin regime was the abolition of slavery in the French colonies. The colonies in the Caribbean were important suppliers of commodities such as tobacco, indigo, sugar. Therefore, the French merchants sailed from the ports of Bordeaux, Nantes, sailed to African coast, bought slaves from the local chieftains. They were branded and shackled and were packed tightly into ships for 3 months long voyage across the Atlantic to the Caribbean. Now the reason why, as I told before, slave labor met the growing demand in Europe market for sugar, coffee and indigo. Throughout the 18th century, there was little criticism for slavery in France. In 1794, the convention legislated to free all the slaves in France's overseas possession. However, Napoleon introduced slavery after 10 years. In 1848, slavery was abolished in French colonies. With the death of Robespierre and with the fall of Directory, there comes the time of Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself Emperor of France. He set out to conquer neighboring European countries, disposing dynasties and creating kingdoms where he placed the members of his families. Napoleon saw his role as modernizer of Europe. He introduced many laws such as protection of private property and a uniform system of weights and measures provided by decimal system. Initially, many saw Napoleon as a liberator who would bring freedom for the people. But soon, the Napoleonic armies came to be viewed everywhere as an invading force. He was finally defeated in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. With this, we come to the end of the chapter. Thank you.